Why and how do we move? Well, we're animals. Why do animals move? Animals, the very word means movement. Breathing, animalia, has to do with things that breathe. Aristotle, thousands of years ago, thought about such questions and asked why it is that animals move, and he understood that there was some combination of reason and motivation and perception. And curiously, he didn't have much to say about the motor act itself. So for thousands of years, we've been thinking about such questions. And recently, the biologists have gotten together, many different fields within biology, and a new discipline of movement ecology has developed. And the movement ecologists have come to understand that we need to think about many scales at the same time. We need to think about limbs over seconds. We need to think about bodies over minutes. We need to think about places that the animals travel over days. And of course, over continents, there are migrations in yearly motion. The basic components of study involve motion science as the engineers understand it, navigation as the cognitive scientists understand it, natural sciences as the physicists and chemists participate, and many, many, many branches come together. In our module, we're not going to so much consider the environmental record of travel. We are not so much going to consider the motivation and evolutionary drivers. We're going to focus largely on the mechanical and navigational capabilities. And when we think about the connections to biology, we're trying very, very hard to understand the lessons of evolutionary ecology, but mostly we'll be focused on what the people in biomechanics and the neuroscientists and the cognitive scientists can tell us. So welcome to this special inquiry into mobility. We'll be spending a lot of time thinking about the relationship between animal mobility and machine mobility in the hours to come. Well, how do animals move? It starts with Newton. Newton says F equals ma. The body accelerates consequent upon forces applied to it. The forces of reaction against the environment cause accelerations, and those forces are carried by appendages, limbs, tails. We'll be concerned with the way in which the appendages of the animals or the machines carry the forces and imbue the body with reaction forces from the ground. This begins a very long and very much unfinished story because the appendages have to travel with the body. And so the appendages can't be left behind. And if they're going to be asserting forces and transmitting forces from the ground to the body, they have to oscillate. If they oscillate, they have to oscillate in tight coordination. And tight coordination requires very complicated and intricate feedback loops, such as the biologists are beginning to uncover and understand, but we in engineering have been thinking about for a very, very long time. The feedback loops include pathways from the environment through the limbs, from the environment through the nerves, within the body through limbs and nerves, and all of these pathways are mixed. What's particularly fascinating to us in robotics about animal movement is that the animals have a lot of their intelligence built into their bodies. Their bodies mix form with function in a marvelous and confusing way. Muscles. Muscles in the animals sometimes function as motors, sometimes they function as brakes, sometimes they function as springs. Intelligence. The intelligence is baked into the body. Well, how don't the animals move? And why are we spending all of our time on the animals? The animals inspire this course because they have been moving successfully for hundreds of millions of years. Animals invented limbed mobility, and we would like to try to be inspired and to learn from their mobility. The animals are focused on body-based sensing, and traditionally this has been less true of the engineering artifacts in robotics. It's very hard for us to build sensors and actuators all into the same body and into the limbs that will be interacting with the world. How do the animals move? Well, on land they stride. How don't they move? Don't they have wheels? Why don't the animals have wheels? Biology has invented wheels a few times in the form of molecular motors and sometimes in the form of organisms. Here's a marvelous stomatopod called the mantis shrimp. This stomatopod was investigated 20 years ago, 25 years ago by my good friend and colleague Bob Full and his collaborators, and what they discovered was that this animal rolls itself up into a ball, really into a disc, and it rolls along the beach as a disc-like wheel. But there are very, very, very few animals that move in this manner. How about in liquid? How do animals move in liquid? In liquid, they slither or they swim. They don't have jets? Well, sure, they have jets. Scientists, biologists have been looking at squids for decades and trying to understand the nature of the jet propulsion that allows the squids to wish through the seas. They think of the squids as just hearts set free. But jet propulsion turns out to be very, very inefficient. It's very inefficient to contain the reaction mass. Mostly, when animals move, they use their limbs. They use their fins, they use their legs, they use their tails. This course is going to be focused on the relationship between the inspiration we receive from biology and the engineering that we can build in consequence. We, therefore, will be studying limbed mobility. And again, when I say limbed, I will mean all sorts of limbs, all sorts of appendages, tails and arms and legs and possibly even fingers. We will be inspired, but we will not copy. The lessons, the first lessons that we learn from our friends in biology is that the history of animal form is very complicated. Millions of years of history that we only partially understand. Let's take, for example, tails. What are tails used for? Well, here's a beautiful, very long, bushy tail, and we might be inspired to try to build such a tail on our robots until we talk to the biologists who tell us that, well, this tail is mostly used for playtime signaling. Probably we don't want our robots to do too much playtime signal, so we will probably not build a tail for this purpose. How about the beaver? The beaver has a tail. The beaver uses its tail for swimming, right? And we know the beaver uses its tail for slapping and warning its fellow beavers of possible enemies. These sound like very, very useful roles for tails, but really, as it turns out, when you talk to the biologists, the beaver's tail is used for storing fat. We probably don't want to store fat in our robots, and we probably will be very careful about how we use insights from the beaver tail in building our robots. And then there are all the many animals, such as pigs or humans, that have vestigial tails. Do we really want to build a vestigial tail on our robots? Probably not. We would like to work with principles and not appearances. We have spent a lot of time talking with Bob Full and his students about how the lizards use their tails to right themselves in situations of crisis or imbalance. And we've spent a number of years working together with him and his students to build tailed robots that don't look anything like those lizards, but have tails that function a little bit like the lizards in their self-righting ability as seen by this little robot car on the left hand, and seen by our Rex robot running across the pedestal of Ben Franklin and righting itself with its tail when it falls off the cliff. These robots don't look anything like the lizard, but the principles involved in getting the body level and consequences of the tail motion is exactly the kind of thing that we want to learn how to do and generalize in robotics. So we're concerned with bioinspiration and not mimicry.